Good afternoon, everybody. Keith here. Hoping everybody's having a good day, enjoying life, living life, loving life. We've been talking here lately about the Social Security Act and CAPTA, Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act. And we discussed that both of those are in the Title 42 of the United States Code. And that is the Public Health and Welfare section. And what I want to talk to about, talk to everybody today about, is in this very beginning, which we're going to find a lot of things in the beginning of a lot of different sections that are going to tell us pretty much what we're looking at right from the start, if we know how to read it. And so I wanted to go through and read this part. We're going to concentrate on just a couple sections here. And it's going to be the first two sections, and within that I'll discuss a couple other things. But under Title 42 of the United States Code, Chapter 1, it talks about the public health services. So if you go to Title 42 of the United States Code, just punch in 42 U.S. Code, and it'll bring up Title 42 of the United States Code. Here it'll say U.S. Code. We're looking for the Cornell Law site. And it says U.S. Code, Title 42, the Public Health and Welfare. And when you click on that link, it'll bring up the code. And under that, it tells you all the different chapters. And when we go to Chapter 1, and that's subsections 1 through 70, says the Public Health Service. Remember, service is a very important word. It means they have a client, a customer, a consumer, and it is a commercial transaction, period. Okay, and when we click on generally, subchapter I, it says generally, and we look at this code, the subchapter I says generally, and they've got all these different sections, and there's only two sections in there that are even on there anymore. When we look at it, it says Section 1 is repealed. Section 2 is omitted. Sections 3 and 4 has been repealed. Section 5 has been omitted. Sections 6 to 15A have been repealed. Section 16 has been omitted. Sections 17 to 25E have been repealed. And then we get to sections 26 and 27, and it says isolation of civilians for protection of military, air, and naval forces. And then section 27 says definitions. And then it goes on, section 28 to 43 have been repealed. Sections 44 and 45 have been repealed. And section 46 has been omitted. Okay? And so sections 1 through 46 are in the subsection I. The sections 47 through 70 will be in subsection II. So in regards to this section, the only two parts that are in here is 26 and 27. And the 26, as I said, is isolation of civilians for protection of military, air, and naval forces. Think about what that's reading. It's saying that there's an isolation of civilians for protection of the military. They're saying that they're protecting the military, air, and naval forces from civilians. Now think about that in the obverse. Isn't that something like a concentration camp? Isn't that something like a reservation? Isn't that like a fear that the civilians are going to harm them in some way, so they need protection? So think about this public health and welfare system. And when we open this up, it says isolation of civilians for protection of military, air, and naval forces. And there is only one thing in here. There's one short paragraph. And it says, the Secretary of the Army. Might I remind you people We start out with 42 U.S. Code, Chapter 1. In that Chapter 1, we go to Subchapter I. In that subchapter, we go to the first section that's available. All the others have been repealed and omitted. And it says, like I said, isolation of civilians for protection of military, air, and naval forces. And under this, the one paragraph says the Secretary of the Army. This is the first discussion we get of any kind of authority in regards to the health and public health and welfare. The Secretary of the Army, the Secretary of the Air Force, and the Secretary of the Navy are authorized and directed to adopt measures for the purpose of assisting the various states caring for civilian persons whose detention, isolation, quarantine, or commitment to institutions may be found necessary for the protection of the military, air, and naval forces of the United States. And this is one of those ones where if you look at this and I talk about the blue line highlighted, it's not talking about the United States, it's talking about states. And when we click on states, it says the term state and states as used in this chapter shall be held to include the District of Columbia. That's all it pertains to, District of Columbia. And then the very last three words. And I want you guys to pull this up so you can read it for yourself. And I'm going to read this the whole thing over again and catch these last three words, people. The Secretary of the Army, the Secretary of the Air Force, and the Secretary of the Navy are authorized and directed to adopt measures for the purpose of assisting the various states, District of Columbia, in caring for civilian persons whose detention, isolation, quarantine, or commitment to institutions, concentration camps, reservations, for all you native Indians, quote, native Indians. Not that I'm trying to use that in a derogatory term, just the term that most people are commonly familiar with, reservations, concentration camps, may be found necessary for the protection of the military, air, and naval forces of the United States, again, District of Columbia, against venereal diseases. This is your public health and welfare program, people. They're protecting civilian or military, air, and naval forces of District of Columbia from venereal diseases of the people. Sounds kind of odd, doesn't it? Read it. So now we're going to go back to subchapter 1, or subchapter I generally, and that was part 26 where we read that off. 27 is the other one in this section that says, or subsection that says definitions. Definitions. And it's plural. But get this. You look up 42 U.S. Code 27, and it says the term state and states as used in this chapter shall be held to include the District of Columbia. So the definitions for this is District of Columbia. Think about this stuff, people. Now, when we go back to the Code Chapter 1, the Public Health Services, where we first got into the generally part, sections 1 through 46, we see below that it says Subchapter 2, Pay. And this is sections 61 through 70A. If you click on that, notice Section 62 omitted, Section 62 repealed, Section 61 omitted, 63 omitted, excuse me. Section 64 repealed, Section 64A to 64C omitted, Section 65 repealed, Section 66 to 69 repealed, Section 70 repealed, Section 70A repealed. The entire section or subchapter 2 on pay has been omitted or repealed. So where is it? It's been changed up or something. This is the kind of stuff we got to think about. Now, those are the first two sections. Those are basically the only two sections I really wanted to talk about because they impart a lot of information in such a small part, if you know how to read it. And so I urge people to start thinking about this stuff. But the next one I want to talk about is we spoke yesterday in the video I did on CAPTA, which is the CAPTA document itself is written up by the Children's Bureau, wherein they state they have no authoritative source. And so you have to refer to the U.S. Code. And so when we look in the U.S. Code, it's under the CAPTA is under Title 42. So here we are in Title 42, the Public Health and Welfare, under Chapter 6, it says the Children's Bureau. Now, Chapter 6 has a Chapter 6A, which says Public Health Service. So here we go again, Public Health Service. Chapter 1, it says the Public Health Service. Chapter 6A, it says Public Health Service. Chapter 1 is the Public Health Service. Chapter 6A is Public Health Service. Now, it runs subchapter I, which is subchapter 1. They do it in Roman numerals here for the subchapters, to subchapter 31. And subchapter 31, just for a bit of trivia, it's a World Trade Center Health Program. You know, they got a lot of issues with asbestos poisoning, cancers, and stuff like that coming out of all the people that work the site out there. So now they have a World Trade Center Health Program, and that's subchapter 31. But the one I want to look at, if we go up, where is it? What is it? General powers and duties, I think. Let me look here. Yes. Under subchapter 2 there, it says general powers and duties. Part B. Part B is federal and state cooperation. General grant of authority for cooperation. Remember, we spoke in CAPTA about grant. What is a grant? A grant is an order. So general order of authority for cooperation can be read instead of general grant of authority. And in here, it says the first one is enforcement of quarantine regulations. Comprehensive and continuing planning. Training of personnel for state and local health work. Fees. Development of plan to control epidemics and meet emergencies or problems resulting from disasters. Cooperative of planning. Temporary assistance. Reimbursement of United States. Speaks nothing in there about people and their health and welfare. Nothing. Where is the next one? Okay, in this same subpart or subsection, we have collaboration and coordination. And here it says this is 42 U.S. Code 247D-7F. Collaboration and coordination. And when we go down to the part C here, it says A1C. Limitation. The secretary may not require participants to disclose confidential, commercial, or proprietary information. The secretary may not require participants to disclose confidential or commercial proprietary information. Okay, now we already heard about earlier about the Secretary of the Army, Secretary of the Navy, and Secretary of the Air Force. Here it says under limitations, we click on Secretary, and it says unless the context otherwise requires, the term Secretary means the Secretary of Health and Human Services. The Secretary of Health and Human Services may not require participants. Participant. The term participant means or has the meaning given such term under Section 3.7 of the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, which is at 29 U.S. Code USC 10027. So let's look at that. And when we pull up 29 of the United States Code, definitions. And U.S. Title 29 of the U.S. Code, that's the Labor Code. Why are we referring to the Labor Code in the Public Health and Welfare Program? Okay, so when we look up 29 U.S.C. 1002 definitions, and we look on here, employee. The term employee means any individual employed by an employer. Okay? So let's find out what employer means. The term employer means any person acting directly as an employer or indirectly in the interest of an employer in relation to an employee benefit plan, and includes a group or association of employees acting for an employer in such capacity. So even employer is ambiguous and doesn't tell us directly who the employer is. Okay, it's just referring to an employer as an employer. According to a benefit plan, an employee benefit plan. Let's see if we can come up with I'm just going to punch in 42 U.S. Code employee benefit plan. Oh, look here. 42 U.S. Code 300E-9. Employees' health benefit plans. Each employer, an employer is, for purposes of this section, the term employer does not include the government of the United States, the government of the District of Columbia, or any territory or possession of the United States, a state or any political subdivision thereof, or any agency or instrumentality including the United States Postal Service and Postal Regulatory Commission, of any of the foregoing, except that such term includes non-appropriated funds, instrumentalities of the government of the United States, or 2, a church, convention, or association of churches, or an organization operated, supervised, or controlled by a church, convention, or association of churches, which organization A is an organization described in Section 501c3 of Title 26. That's your nonprofit organization. And B, does not disseminate, 1, in the employment, compensation, promotion, or termination of employment of any personnel. So, in other words, anything that has anything in there in terms of compensation, employment, promotion, termination, that's an employer. And why are they an employer? Because they're conducting business in the interest of Federal Reserve notes. Who owns the Federal Reserve notes? Actually, it's the IMF. And they've granted use to the Federal Reserve as a central banking system in contract with the United States to conduct their business affairs by using the fiat currency known as Federal Reserve notes. That's who the contract is with. It's not with me. It's with them. I'm not employed. I'm not the employer. And I'm not directly employed by an employer. I'm indirectly contracted with somebody using employer and employee terms unknowingly, unwittingly, and unintentionally, no matter how long they've been operating that business. They started out as a family mom and pop's joint known as McDonald's, and now they're worldwide, and they're conducting business affairs, calling everybody employees and themselves employers. And I'll note here that even though they're an international corporation now and they're conducting business affairs in foreign countries using different fiat currencies with different central banks, they're still using the economic standard or the world standard of the Federal Reserve note as the dollar. And the Federal Reserve note is intrinsically known to have zero value per HJR 192 Public Law 7310. Wherein that if the Federal Reserve note has no value, and that's the standard world currency, then that foreign corporate or that McDonald's corporation operating in a foreign jurisdiction using a different foreign currency but based on the Federal Reserve note still has no value. Period. They're operating in a like-kind system. A central banking system and not a private banking system. Period. Think about this stuff, people. Or 2, in the extension of staff or other privileges to any physician or other health personnel, because such persons seek to obtain or obtained health care or participate in providing health care through a health maintenance organization. In the extension of staff or other privileges to any physician or health personnel. Okay? This is one of the parts of the section that I want to clear up real quick because they're using an ambiguous term, and I'll show you how they're using an ambiguity in the title itself. When we look this stuff up and we see 42 of the United States Code, and again, remember when we discuss this definition of employer, whether they actually determined that the employer was a certain corporation or anything, makes no difference, because I still want to point out, in the definition of employer, it says the term employer means any person. Just like the when I discussed in the CAPTA Act, child means any person. It's still a fictional entity in a corporate sense. It's still a commercial activity. It's still proof of a commercial transaction. Okay? But in regards to Title 42 of the United States Code, which is the public health and welfare. Now, when we look at the word welfare, we're looking at our health and well-being. So when we look at the Title 42 where it says public health and welfare, it's kind of redundant and kind of speaks on ambiguity. We could replace that word welfare with health and well-being. So it's kind of redundant. Why don't we just say it health and well-being? And therefore, now we can get to the point where we can clarify the word health. Okay? And this is the top priority in all of man, in that we have the right to make our own choices in all aspects of life, because our own choices, in effect, just like contracts are arbitrary because they start out with arbitration, our right to stand up for ourselves starts with our health. It starts with our physical health, our mental health, our emotional health, and we have to be able to have that mental capacity to be able to look out for our physical capacity in regards to that health. And so when it comes to health, it's in regards to our own spirituality. Okay? And that is the essence of everything we do in life. We are in charge of our own health and well-being. Okay? And when we do that, we have to think about this collaboration and coordination we're talking about. The state is collaborating and coordinating with the federal government. And like I said, they are collaborating and coordinating the public health services generally for the purpose of assisting the various states in caring for civilian persons whose detention, isolation, quarantine, or commitment to institutions may be found necessary for the protection of the military, air, and naval forces of the United States against venereal diseases. So think about this, people. If you really want to protect yourself and stand up for yourself in doing so, you have to comprehend your own health and well-being. You have to comprehend where you get your wealth and welfare, or health and welfare. Are you getting it from the state? Are they the ones through the FAA or FDA, Food and Drug Administration, the big pharma, the health and welfare title, benefit plans, medical benefit plans? Are they providing for your health and well-being? Or are you providing for your own health and well-being by following your natural instincts and eating a good solid diet and staying away from the processed foods that the corporations put out? I explained to somebody one time while they're sitting there eating, and granted, he was only like 8 or 9 years old or something at the time, maybe a little bit, maybe another year older or something. But I explained to him that those chicken nuggets that he loves so well was all the scraps that they scraped off the plant floor and then washed with bleaches and additives and stuff, and then glued back together with glues and everything so that he could eat all the parts along with all the chemicals and stuff that they used to clean it and make it nice, clean, white looking chicken meat, when it was in fact all kinds of scraps and stuff. And that's why every once in a while you'll find a little piece of gristle or something in there. So, you know, you got to think about this stuff. And would you rather have a nice solid piece of a chicken that you grew yourself, that you stewarded through life yourself, and was able to procure through prosperity and abundance to put on your own table? Were you able to give the sacrifice of the first chick that was born by giving it to your neighbor who needed help? That's your welfare program. That's your own private welfare program in prosperity and abundance. That's your offering of sacrifice. You see, when Jesus was sacrificed on the cross, it gave up it relinquished us from having to give that blood sacrifice by giving an offering to our brother in kind to help him, to help steward him in prosperity and abundance. So when we have our own abundance and we have all these calves and goats and chickens, when this mother has a firstborn calf, we give that calf to a neighbor or somebody that's not doing as well or could use it in that prosperity. Somebody that doesn't have a flock started or something. Give them. He gets one from you, and your neighbor has a firstborn calf, and he gives it to him too. You happen to have now a gift of a calf that is female and a gift of a calf that is male, and he husbands them. That's husbandry. That's stewardship. And so then from there, just like stewarding that chicken, he stewards these 2 cattle. And from that stewardship, he begets another cattle. Now he's got a flock. And they beget another cattle. That firstborn calf he gives to somebody else. He's got another one coming, so he passes on that stewardship. So we no longer have to pay for the sins of our fathers. That's your health and well-being, people. Looking out for each other. Naturally, inherently, in a perfect way. Without a monetary system. I urge everybody at this point, read Job. Read Job and find out how he lived his life. That's living in prosperity, and then at the end of his life, it's all taken away, and he still gives himself to his God, to his Creator. He still relinquishes to bow down, refuses to bow down to that satanic behavior. And so while we live life, we need to refuse to bow down to that satanic behavior. So for those people that are involved in this health and welfare system, I beg you to understand it. Or not understand it. I beg you to comprehend it. I beg you to learn about it. I beg you to research it and comprehend what it's talking about. Again, isolation of us. They're isolating. First 3 words, isolation of what they deem civilians. In their military operations, they deem us civilians, and they are isolating us for the protection of them, the military, air, and naval forces. Read it. Concise English tells you, and like I said, it's all mathematical. Isolation of civilians. For protection of military, air, and naval forces. Very simple statement right there. Tells you what this code is about. So think about this stuff, people, and I urge everybody, do your due diligence. Start talking about this stuff. Like we're learning, arbitration, contract starts with a discussion, a debate, a question and answer session, an arbitration. In order to conduct a conversation with our brothers and sisters, it is arbitrary that we be heard. It is arbitrary that we speak. In beginning was Word. If we're going to speak, we need to speak clearly, mathematically, so that we can be comprehended. Isolation of civilians. First, what's isolation? It's a concentration. It's a quarantine. Of what? Civilians. Who are civilians? And who is determining civilians? Well, first let's think about who's isolating. U.S. Code. Well, it's in the U.S. Code, so it's the federal government that is isolating of us. They are deeming the word isolation of civilians for protection of military, air, and naval forces. And military, air, and naval forces is them. So think about this stuff, people, and put it in its right context. And remember, if it wasn't for you guys, I wouldn't be doing this. God bless you. Love you. Have a great day.